Hello guys, it's the Caribbean Bookworm, and today I will be giving you a book review for The Hellbound Heart written by Clive Barker. The Hellbound Heart is a book written by Clive Barker, and it also has a movie adaptation, which I imagine a lot more people have heard of, and that is the original movie of Hellraiser, that originally came out in 1987. The movie is very famous because it basically spawned a slur of other movies, like a whole franchise of Hellraiser, based off of the famous horror icon of Pinhead, this white figure with a lot of basically nails sticking out of his face. And ever since these Hellraiser movies, Pinhead got his status as a horror icon right up there with other figures like Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees. But what I find it very interesting, in a very similar fashion to Jason Voorhees in Friday the 13th in the original movie, I tend to find that Hellraiser, even in both the novel and in the first movie, Pinhead isn't the focus of, well, the whole story in essence. So, in order to dive more into that, let's get into what the story entails, especially from the novel's perspective. So, The Hellbound Heart is a short book, it's a novella basically, which I highly appreciate it for, that is about a guy called Frank, which basically finds this cubic looking objects. It's like a Rubik's Cube made of wood called the Lamarckin's box, and basically, instead of being like a Rubik's Cube, it has a lot of like ancient engravings. And when you solve this Lamarckin's box, you basically summon these otherworldly entities known as the Cenobites. And these things are basically things which just drag you down to, while it might either be hell or it just might be another dimension of some sort, and they basically torture you endlessly. And people try to solve this stuff because they might think, for example, in Frank's case, he thought that by solving this Lamarckin's box that he will obtain otherworldly pleasures beyond anything known to mankind, basically. But alas, otherworldly pleasure is the last thing that Frank finds while unlocking this box, as he basically comes head to head with these creatures known as the Cenobites, and their descriptions for these things is insanely gore, but we will get into that very soon. So after this happens and after Frank gets taken away by the Cenobites, his brother Rory, along with his wife Julia, moves into the house at which basically like Frank was living in, and they try to establish a life there. And especially Rory is quite happy and content there, but Julia is at first, at least, not very comfortable and cozy at the place at which they're living. But Julia is consistently throughout the story feeling a presence of some sort, especially in the room at which Frank tried to perform this ritual of opening the Lamarckin's box. And she slowly starts noticing that there is a presence in that room, and that presence is actually Frank. That Frank is basically still alive, but it is pretty much almost not there. It's like, it's, if you want to talk of it in terms of new agey sense, it's like this aura is there, but his physical manifestation is not. And basically, Yulia, throughout the story, Yulia finds herself having to do all of these very devious and non-moral things, basically, in order to bring Frank slowly back to life. Because basically, it turns out that Julia, throughout the whole story, actually liked Frank, who is Rory's brother, her husband's brother, much more than she actually loved her husband like himself. So basically, this is an affair of the supernatural sort. So that is basically the meat and bone of this novel right here. So the focus is more on Yulia trying to do these very devious things in order to bring Frank back to life, and Frank coming back to life and manifesting in these very contorted and non-human forms before he actually almost manages to become a real human. And the actions which need to be done on Yulia's part is described in very gory fashion. And also there is another character which is actually, you could say, somewhat the protagonist of the story, that is slowly but surely coming to a know that something odd is happening in that home at which Rory and Julia is living. This character is the character of Kirby. This is one bit where I have to mention the book diverges from the movie. Like if you've seen the movie, then you know where this is going. But if you haven't read the book, then in the movie, Kirby is the daughter of Rory, and basically Yulia is her stepmother. But in the book, Kirby is more of a friend to Rory, and it's one of those cases in which you're kind of dubious whether or not the friendship is purely platonic, because you can clearly notice hints that basically Kirby cares about Rory a little bit more beyond just platonic friendships. So there's something there, but this basically gets her to be a little bit more invested into Rory's life, and that's why she starts noticing basically some weird behavioral changes, especially of Julia. But in essence, this is what the story entails, and some of the definite positives I have with this is, well, firstly, as I mentioned before, this is a novella. I haven't read the thing physically. Like I don't have the physical copy. Otherwise, I would be holding it right now. And I haven't read it through an ebook either. I actually read it, or you could say listen to it as an audiobook, as it is very accessible here on YouTube as an audiobook narrated. Well, I will actually just put the thumbnail of the video right here. And the person narrates it really well. It's about 3 hours long, which I find to be very forgiving for an audiobook. Usually, these audiobooks are at least about 5 hours long or so, which is fine, but means that you do have to listen to it, at least in my personal case, in segments. But 3 hours, I think that's very doable. So it was a very nice story that you can get through like in one day, literally. And another major positive which I have with this story is the whole combination of body horror and cosmic horror. Like this is one of those cases at which, when it is describing like Frank and the things which Julia is doing to kind of bring Frank back, it describes it in very gory details, and even Frank himself as he's slowly manifesting and coming back to life, because he isn't coming back to life immediately. Like it's described in very anatomically like descriptive manners in which he is not pretty much a whole person like initially. And that is very nice because, especially maybe if you haven't seen the movie at first, like if you're reading this for the first time, then you're gonna come up with all types of crazy things in your mind, and it's gonna really mess you up, especially as you're trying to picture how what Frank looks like. So I give that book major pluses for that. And the cosmic horror is especially prominent when talking about the Cenobites, and when you have moments which actually shows these Cenobites, which, as I've mentioned before, are very few in between. Like they're not the main focus of the story, but when they are into play, that you know that these are otherworldly supernatural things, which, even though they might resemble some humanoid creatures of some sorts, they aren't 100% humanoid. Like you see that they don't have a sex, and also that basically, even though their outlines might look somewhat humanoid, their actual like features are not. It's twisted, messed up. There's chains, hooks in places in which you don't want to have chains or hooks, and they're unfazed by this. So yeah, that's all I will say from that. Cenobites are very interesting, like descriptions and creatures, which came from the mind of a very messed up vision, I would imagine. But it is very interesting. I highly recommend you either watch the movie or read the book for that sole purpose of like exploring the concepts of Cenobites. And also, it is never clearly explained whether or not they're actually like things from hell. The general gist is that apparently they are from hell, like that they're creatures which torture whoever opens this box, and they come from hell. But at least in the book, in the Hellbound Heart, at least it is never clearly explained about what their origins actually is. It's kind of left as a mystery, which I really enjoy. It leaves room for interpretation. So the cosmic horror and the body horror is especially good in this story, and in general, even though this isn't a positive, you could say, of the book, it's more of a positive to like the author himself. the book actually transitions very nicely into the first movie because at the end of the day, like it is the author that wrote the screenplay and also directed the first movie itself. So it's basically a direct adaptation with some minor changes, some questionable changes at times, but some definite like minor changes happening. So this is one of those cases in which you can be almost very much positive that the movie translates well from the book and does some things even better. But some of the minor negatives that which I have with this novel, which is not even a lot, one of them is that basically the way in which Frank's manifestation basically is explained throughout the story, it's well just that. It's not very clearly explained. Like it is shown basically how, especially at the later stages, he's able to pull himself more and more towards being a whole person, but how that starts and transitions into him slowly but surely becoming a whole person, it's not very clearly like explained and elaborated on. It's kind of like seeing a magician like pull a dove out of a handkerchief or something, and you're like, where did the dove come from? It's kind of like that. I guess that comes into play due to the fact that it's supposed to be like this supernatural thing, which is left beyond your imagination, very Lovecraftian of some sorts. But it is much more clear, I find, explained in the movie because in the movie it is actually shown how he is able to start to come back to life, you could say, and it might even be a product of the two different media, you could say. So in movies, it's the most efficient way of storytelling is to show and not tell, and in books, well, you tend to tell more than you show, basically. So it might be why you tend to get more insights into the motivations and you could say thought patterns of the characters in contrast to actually seeing what's happening. Might be due to that. But it's still a little bit jarring at times and you will definitely feel it, especially if you want to like imagine this stuff in your mind as you're reading the story. But that is basically the only negative I will have with this book basically. I pretty much enjoyed it. I won't say it's a flawless like book. It's definitely not for everyone, and it is the main reason why I didn't give it like a 4 out of 5 on Goodreads. I gave it a 3 out of 5 because I think it's a good story. I personally very much like it. It's right off my alley of cosmic horror, and also my liking for slasher stuff. But it's not like something which I will like say it's like, oh, this life changing experience that you have to read this once in your life or something. Like I think if you read it, it's fine. If you don't, that's also fine. It depends on what you want to do. But I'd say the most indicative thing that like basically decides whether or not you should read this book, I think this is one of those cases in which it would like be nice for you to jump into the movie adaptations first, like watch the first Hellraiser movie or maybe even the 2022 like the Hellraiser movie that came out this year. It's apparently actually really good. It got good reviews and such, so you might watch that as it's a more modern take and enjoy it and then decide from there on that, oh, I actually want to actually read the original story that this is based on, and then you jump into the novella that is the Hardbound Heart, and you might find that the Hellbound Heart, sorry, and you might find that, well, either you enjoy it or you might not. In my case, again, I actually enjoyed it. It's just I know that it's not for everyone. So yeah, I hope you actually enjoyed this review, and I heard that basically this Arthur Clive Barker, even though some of the other Hellraiser books which were written were not necessarily the best, I heard that he has a high fantasy or a fantasy book known as Weave Worlds that is also very good. So if any of you out there are Clive Barker fans or have read that book, Weave Worlds, let me know down in the comments down below whether or not you recommend me to jump into it because it sounds interesting by the description of which I read on Goodreads, but I'm not sure whether or not it's something I should immediately jump into. But if some of you pitch it right in the comment section, then I will actually give it some thoughts to actually jump into it. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read that Weave Worlds book. Let me also know if you've read like the Hellbound Heart, and also if you've seen the Hellraiser movies. What are your thoughts on it? I'm very curious. Like I'm very curious to hear from you. Basically, what you think. And also, thank you again for watching throughout the whole review. Me ranting about this book, and also hit the like button, hit the bell notification, subscribes. All of those things greatly help me to produce more content for you guys. So I hope to see you guys very soon, and bye.